Linwood Barclay, welcome to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm just great, Mark. Nice to be with you.
It's lovely to speak to you. And we're going to be talking about your new novel, Find You First, which I just burned through. I just picked it up, opened it, and I could not stop reading it. And it was such a joy. And we're going to talk about it in more detail, the craft of how you put together a novel like this. But tell us first about Find You First.
Find You First is a thriller about a guy named Miles, who is a kind of very wealthy tech guy. He's reached a certain age. He's in his 40s. He's not married. He has no kids and so forth. And he finds out that he has a disease that's going to, it's terminal. And his doctor says to him, well, it's a good thing you don't have kids because if you did, this is about, 50-50 on inheriting this condition. And then he has to think back to the fact that he was some 20 years ago a sperm donor. So there are kids out there, grown adults now, who may very well be in a position who are going to have this condition. And he feels an obligation to start finding them, to sort of warn them, but also these are his heirs. And once Miles starts looking for these individuals, they start getting picked off one by one. And one of the first ones that he finds is a young woman named Chloe, who's an aspiring documentarian. And with Chloe's help, they start trying to figure out what's happening to all of these others, products of his sperm donation more than 2 decades ago.
And it's, like I say, it's just an absolute page turner. Miles and Chloe are very much at the heart of this. And it's a dynamic you don't see very often in storytelling, which is a father and a daughter. Was that something new to you?
It just kind of developed. It's funny. I don't think I quite anticipated how central this relationship would be in the book until I got into it. And once I was into it, it just was their closeness and their working together that became really kind of the heart of the novel in many ways. And so it's a lot. And of course, Chloe's half his age and very independent minded, and she doesn't take any kind of guff from anybody, especially this fellow who's very likely her father. So she was a fun character to write.
Now, this is a real roller coaster read. It is an absolute delight, and it constant surprises, constant twists and reversals. Now, I've read in previous interviews with you that they surprise you as much as the reader. You don't really outline very much, do you?
Well, it's kind of, I'm one of these guys who outlines up to a point. I know the big picture, and I know where I want to end up, but what happens along the way, I don't know. And so I don't see the opportunities that exist in the novel until I'm kind of well into it. So I can be in a chapter and I think, what's a really logical way that this chapter would end? And is there a way I can make that not happen? So a lot of twists are really kind of minor twists or kind of sleight of hand kinds of things. But I think that the trick is I don't want to get bored. And if I get bored, I know the reader will get bored. So it's really a case of keeping myself interested, I think.
But when you have one of those big turning points, obviously that is a choice that you make as a writer. And the choices we make as writers have ramifications, much like they do for the characters in the story. Is that the point where you kind of stop, sit back and go, okay, where does this go now?
Occasionally. The biggest twists are usually ones that I have known were coming for a long time, and I kind of can't wait to get to them. So those ones are kind of built in my plan for the most part. So they're part of the plan. But there are smaller ones that come along the way. I don't know quite how they come about in some ways. It's kind of like playing the piano by ear. You just kind of know where you're going, and when you get there, you know what to do.
Excellent stuff. Now, we love authors who are, rule breakers, who do things a little bit differently. And I just want to talk about the first chapter specifically. And listeners, if you're listening to this, go Find You First, okay, on your online retailer of choice, because usually they'll have the first chapter, and dig into this first chapter just to see how this is done. Because we've had editors come on here, we've had authors come on here, and they say similar things, which is, don't head hop. Okay, choose a point of view for a chapter, okay, and stick with that point of view. But in your opening chapter, and I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but this is a thriller, and there's someone in that opening chapter who isn't making it to chapter 2, basically. And you start in their point of view, and then you ease into the point of view of 2 other people, and then 1 person. And I was reading it thinking, this is genius. You can't see the joins or anything. How aware are you when you're writing of those little, I won't say rule breaking moments, but where you're doing something like that, where you're taking a principle and turning it on its head?
That's a good question. I mean, thank you for that comment. I mean, I have to say, it wasn't a conscious thing. I mean, what happens in that sort of prologue is, yes, we do start with one character, although it's kind of hard to maintain his point of view when he's dead. So you know what I mean? So you do kind of have to switch. So, I mean, there's a spoiler, folks, but it's, so you really have to, and because it's, I know that when you're writing first person, you really do have a kind of rigid point of view in a storyline, in a chapter that's, say, first person. And often even in third person novels, which this is, you do kind of have a point of view of whoever the central character is in that chapter. But this is really, that opening chapter is one where the camera is moving around, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's moving from one person to another. So you really do have, you're coming at that from different perspectives and only probably, I don't know what it is, like 8-9 pages. But a lot happens in that opener, and there are even within that prologue, we have a twist, and so those changes of points of view are rather necessitated by the fact that certain people have departed from life.
It was great. I mean, I picked it up knowing nothing about the book. It had been sent to me as, oh, great, new Linwood Barclay. I open it up, and it said, oh, it's about this guy. Oh no, it's not about it. Can't be about this guy, So it was so much fun. And then the next rule that you break. So you say you have this little prologue, and then I turn the page, and in big letters it says 3 weeks earlier, which again is one of those things you hear editors saying, "Oh, don't do that, don't do that." But you did it. You went there, and I salute you for it.
Sometimes you really want to start a story with a bang. You want to start it with something big, and if you tell your story in a kind of linear time, the big things don't happen till later. So you really need to do a kind of what I'd call a flash forward. You need to take some event that's going to happen and just use that to grab the reader by the lapels and just shake them and say, hey, this is a big thing. And after that, we're going to take you back. And where I sort of first started seeing that, even before I started writing novels as much as now, was TV and movies, notably J.J. Abrams, who, even going back to the Alias series that he made, that first one, Alias, and then think of Mission Impossible 3, he takes a really terrifying, dramatic moment to get you in the first 3 minutes. And then he's got you, and then he says, okay, this happened later. Now we're going to show you all the things that brought us to that point. And I think it's an interesting technique. And I mean, it may very well be that I'm starting a story that way, and because we all have shorter attention spans now, and we feel we haven't got much time to get your attention and hold on to you. And so I think we got to grab you right away. And because there are about a million other things that could distract you, from binge watching series or playing on your stupid phone or God knows what. So we don't have a lot of time to get your attention. So this is what we're going to do.
It's interesting hearing you say that, because we had Joe Hill on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And he said pretty much the same. He said, have you seen Netflix? Have you seen what's in TV? And this is what we're competing against now.
Well, so it's funny. I was at a Thriller Writers Conference a few years ago, and all of us were sitting around and said, oh, have you seen Breaking Bad? Have you seen this? Have you seen them watching 24? And then it kind of hit us that nobody was saying, have you read such and such? And it just dawned on us, oh my God, we're eating our own. We're sitting here talking about TV shows at a writer's convention and not about anything that anybody has written, so.
Well, let's talk about TV for a while, because I saw somewhere that you started out by writing what we would call fan fiction for the TV show Man from U.N.C.L.E. Is that where you got the bug?
Yep. In fact, I credit that 1960s spy show in many ways with my wanting to become a writer, because when I was 9-10 years old and that show debuted, I was obsessed with it. There was just something about it that just grabbed my imagination. And so an episode a week was not enough for me. So I had to create more adventures with these characters on my own. And so I had gotten my dad to teach me how to type, because handwriting stories took too long. So I got a 2-minute typewriting lesson on an old Royal typewriter that weighed about the same as a Volkswagen. And so I started typing out novellas when I was, 12, 13 years old. that were probably, 30, 40 page adventures about the characters from Man from U.N.C.L.E. Because like I say, an episode a week was killing me. I needed more. And then having started doing that, there were other shows that I thought, I'm going to write, I wrote novellas based on Mission Impossible and Columbo. I wrote a lot of Columbo novellas. And I was writing these all through my teens. So in many ways, like, when people say, well, what inspired you to write? And they're waiting for you to say Hemingway or Shakespeare. I'm going, TV. It was TV. And I think that's carried through to the writing because to me, chapter breaks are commercial breaks. They always ended TV in the 60s and 70s, that there were these sort of quarterly breaks. And they always ended, before they went to commercial, with some kind of a mini cliffhanger so that you thought, well, if I'm going to get a snack and go to the bathroom, I got to go right fast. I got to go and get back because I have to see what's going to happen next. And I think, to me, that's how you end a chapter. You have to end a chapter in such a way that you're compelled to go to the next one.
Fantastic. And those typing lessons, or that 2-minute typing lesson that your father gave you, it paid off because you were writing in newspapers for 3 decades. And
yeah.
I know from talking to editors that they love journalists who become novelists because they know how to hit a deadline. But what other skills did you bring with you from working at the papers?
Well, yeah, I did. I worked in newspapers for 3 decades. The bulk of it at Canada's largest circulation paper, the Toronto Star, and I was hired there as an editor. I spent 12 years as an editor, assistant city editor, news editor, life editor. I did all those kind of tasks. And then I started writing allegedly a humor column, which I did for 14 years, before I left that paper in 2006. And I'll tell you what, working in a newspaper has a couple of ways of affecting how you work as a novelist. One, as you said, is deadlines. Deadlines are God. You don't miss deadlines. And they're everything. So deadlines are a big thing. But the other, I think, most important thing is you learn not to be precious. And you learn that writing is a job. And so, when I was a columnist and I wrote 3 columns a week, imagine if I had called the editor and said, I'm just not feeling it today. The muse hasn't struck. And so I think I might have writer's block and so forth. Well, any editor would say, well, why don't you have writer's block on another paper? And so, when you get up in the morning, you go to work. And so my goal when I'm writing a novel is to sit down and I want to get 2,000 words done. And some days I might not quite make it. Some days I'll do better than that. But it's a job. And I rant about writer's block all the time. Do plumbers get plumber's block? Do teachers get teacher's block? Why are we so special that we have a condition to describe getting out of work, So I think that's what working at a newspaper really does. It teaches you not to be precious. And and I've worked in newspapers and had stuff ripped to shreds and rewritten and redone and done it, and all done in minutes. And so you learn that it's you just can't be too ridiculous and full of self-importance, I think, about your work.
Okay, but here's a thing for you. Deadlines are one thing, but when you're starting a new novel, do you ever doubt yourself?
I doubt myself every single step of the way. I'm sitting here right now doing it. I know, why would this guy want to talk to me? Didn't he have somebody important to talk to today? So yeah, I think that writing is very much one of the biggest parts of writing is just thinking, oh my God, I'm completely terrible at this. And I've fooled everybody into thinking that I can do this and they're publishing my books and what a bunch of idiots they are to go out and buy them. It's terrible stuff. So most writers I know are like that. But, but the flip side, like I said before, it's still a job and you have to get to work and you have to put those doubts aside and get it done. So when I start a book, I'm not usually too worried in that sense. I think, though, the challenge is when you start a new book, you think, I want this to be the best one I've ever done. Every time you write a book, you think, I hope this is better than all the ones that came before it. And sometimes you manage it and other times not so much, but you try. So that's kind of the goal, is to, every book be the one that's the best. And so that's if that answers the question.
It does. And reading Find You First, there's a kind of glee in the writing. You really seem to enjoy messing with the reader. Is that what makes your day?
Oh yeah, I do love doing that. And and I don't want to do any spoilers, but there's an escape that spans several chapters towards the end.
Mm.
I
Oh
just
man,
could
yeah,
not wait to write. Oh, I had such a blast writing that
yeah,
particular scene,
yeah.
and because it's kind of over the top in a way, but I think that if current events have taught us anything in the last 6 months, that you just can't write anything that's over the top.
No.
I mean, it's like if you had written 3 years ago in a novel the things that have happened in the last month, people would say, "Well, that could never happen." Now I feel novelists can always say, "Oh, really? Are you sure?" So I had a great time writing that, and I do love writing the twist because and a lot of times when close friends or somebody read it, and it's like, "Oh God, just shut up and let me read the book." But yeah, there's a lot of it that's when you get to it, it's a lot of fun.
Wonderful stuff. I've got a couple of listener questions. Got a question from Laura Shepherd. Any tips for executing high concept ideas without it coming across as gimmicky? And I'm talking to the guy here who wrote a novel called Elevator Pitch. See, high concept is in your ballpark. How do you pull off those ideas? Because it's got to be more than just a clever idea, hasn't it?
Well, it does. It has to be more. It has to be a clever idea that can sustain 100,000 words, and so it can't just be like, "Wow, this is neat." There has to be a foundation to it. There has to be. It has to be, for the most part, believable, or at least be something that people are willing to sort of suspend disbelief to take on that idea. And when I first had the idea for Elevator Pitch, which is, as you may know, it's about a guy who's New York City being terrorized by somebody who's sabotaging elevators. And when I first had the idea, I thought, "Oh, this is too crazy. This is too wild an idea." And happened to mention it to my agent the day I had thought of it. I said, "Oh, I had this crazy idea about a guy who's a serial killer who wipes out people by sabotaging lifts." And she said, "Oh my God, you have to start writing that tomorrow." And so, she was able to see that, no, that is really a great concept. You just have to sort of sit down and think it through. Can they make this work? And that was very true with Find You First. And then a better idea came to me. And I think that idea, I think, is ultimately believable based on things that we may have read about certain people in the last several years.
Yes. When you get these ideas, when you get okay, a guy's going to terrorize people by sabotaging elevators, do you sort of file that away for later, or do you just get to work on it straight away?
Well, that depends what I'm doing at the time. I mean, I might have an idea when I'm already finishing working on another book, or something. So I would tuck it away. And the thing is, if I sit down and think I need to think of a really high concept, great idea, go, it won't happen.
No. Yes. Yeah.
The idea is just kind of like the elevator pitch just came to me because I was listening to an item on the local news. And then the idea was there. It just was instantly there. What if you had a guy who was killing people off by sabotaging elevators? Now, if I hadn't listened to that radio broadcast or that news broadcast, that idea never would have happened. So you just have to be kind of a receptor. You're just sort of waiting for something to hit you. And I was, in fact, when I had the idea for Elevator Pitch, I was still in the midst of writing the novel before that called A Noise Downstairs. So I had to set it aside and know that it would be the next thing I would do.
Wonderful. Your titles as well are just amazing. Do they come first? Do they come quite a way into the process?
Well, they're often a committee decision. There's so many things that go into a title. I mean, first of all, you may have a great title and find out it's been used recently. You come up with a title and you think, well, it's been used. There's all sorts of reasons as to why a title may or may not work. And I think I've done the title for about half of my books. And the rest have been kind of, committee decisions between editors and publishers and agents and so forth. What works for everybody? Because, there have been instances where books have been released with different titles in North America versus, say, England. And I think that just leads to immense confusion. So for readers. So we don't want that to happen. And it's just kind of capturing, like when I wrote a book a few years ago called Trust Your Eyes, which was about a guy who was obsessed with a sort of Google Street View type website and spent all of his time on it. I was going to call it The Traveler. And my editors and so forth said, that sounds like a science fiction book. That doesn't really work. And so it was back to, as they say, back to the drawing board. So there's a lot that goes into titles.
I've got another question from Christopher Wills, and he says, in a series with a returning protagonist, should a writer show any character arc or character development through the series? Now, I know you've done series like the Zach Walker mysteries, and you did the Promise Falls books. You don't do huge... I mean, what's interesting with you is you have some characters return, but more often than not you do standalones. But where you've done those series where characters return, and what did you find was helpful? Was the character development helpful, or was it like that Columbo thing where they come back for a new adventure each time?
Well, it's, and I think that every writer has to do their own, what works for them. I mean, back back in the when we watched TV in the 60s and 70s, there was no character arc. You could watch any episode in any order and it wouldn't make any difference. And so that worked that was fine. And then once we got into the 80s and we started having shows like Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere, suddenly we were having arcs, storylines that span, many episodes and seasons. And I think it's whatever works for, whoever's doing it. And when I was doing the 4 Zach Walker novels, there is kind of an arc to those, because Zach starts off with a certain very kind of a behavior that gets him in a lot of trouble, and he has to learn from that as the books progress. And so they're best read in order. And the Promise Falls trilogy that I wrote, Broken Promise, Far From True, and the 23, those must be read in order, because that's really just one big book. And I think what I learned from all that is I'm not going to do it again. Because and not just because I thought I should write them all at once, and I wrote all 3 books in 15 months and it just about killed me. But the other thing is that when they were rolled out, the publishers were reluctant to make too clear that this was a trilogy, because they were afraid if they wrote, this is book 1, nobody would buy it until book 3 was out. And so what I ended up having was readers were all confused. They would get to the end of book 2, which was unresolved, and they said, well, what the hell? And I have to write them back on Facebook or Twitter saying, there's another book. And it just led to so much confusion that I thought, I'm never doing this again. So for me, I find standalones are really the best. There may be a little hint or a character from another book, but it won't matter whether you have read it or not. And so that's kind of the lesson I learned. And moving forward, I'm kind of going in that direction. Wonderful stuff. Talking about moving forward, what's coming next from you, Linwood? Well, I got Find You First, obviously, which is imminent. I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It's like a Michael Crichton thriller with sort of tech elements. And we've been trying to, and I think we're finally going to get it out later this year, maybe as an ebook only, we're not sure, but it's so different than from what I usually do that we kind of been struggling with what to do with it. But I'll give you the elevator pitch for it, which is, think Jurassic Park, but instead of dinosaurs, it's self-driving cars. And you have a situation, a test community, a kind of Martha's Vineyard area, where a Tesla-like company comes in and says, the best way to test self-driving cars, autonomous cars, is if the only kind of cars on the road are those, because they all talk to each other. They're like a network. They're a hive mind, So everybody agrees to surrender their regular cars to the mainland, and then a virus gets introduced into the system, and all the cars become homicidal. So it's kind of like 1,000 Christines. And I had such a blast writing this book. It was so much fun. I don't even have a title. I have a title, but I don't think it's going to survive. But that book I've been teasing people with in my newsletter and so forth for a long time. And I think this is the year that'll be out. And also I've actually finished the first draft of what will be the 2022 book, which has a working title of She's Back. And I haven't even heard from I've just delivered it to my publishers last week. My editor thinks it's the best thing I've done since No Time for Goodbye, which was my huge breakout book back in 2008. So that's what's happening there. And right now, my plate is clear. We're sort of semi-locked down here in Toronto, so it's going to be more binge watching and then working on my insane model railway in the basement. There's a couple of TV or movie things that are in the pipe that may or may not happen. And so fingers crossed on those. Well, that's wonderful. Looking forward to all of that. But folks, grab a copy of Find You First. You will not regret it. It's an absolute trip. Linwood Barclay, thank you so much for speaking to me today, and hope to speak to you again soon.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. You know, as a Canadian, he does continue that tradition of the nicest author on the planet. You know, I found living out in Canada, there's just this really lovely, lovely flow to Linwood. It's absolutely brilliant. And one of the things that I absolutely loved, he talked about, I mean, we've talked about this before, about journalists converting to I mean, how many people have I mean, I can't even begin to remember now how many authors, best-selling authors that we've interviewed.
If we did a pie chart, there would be journalists, lawyers taking up 2/3, and then everyone else.
Exactly. But I'm fascinated. I mean, we've talked a lot about deadlines in the podcast. We've talked about deadlines as courses that we've created in the academy. But you know, I don't think there's any better training for writing a book than being a journalist. And the way that Linwood described it, of these, you know, if you're 5 minutes late with an article, then the whole paper just collapses. I think there's something there, isn't there? It's like it's enforced training, but it must be absolutely brilliant. There's probably no surprise he's written so many books. Well,
for me, it's writing on set on a film. You know, when you're writing a screenplay, you know, I come down here first thing in the morning, and you know, I've got at least a couple of hours, crack my knuckles, sit back, make a cup of tea, start writing, stare out the window because it's spring, the blue tits are going into the birdhouse, you know, and then I write some more. Can't do that when you're on set. You know, if you're on set and someone says, okay, this bit of dialogue doesn't work, the actors have had this idea, can you rework it around that idea? Oh yeah, sure, right, there you go, half an hour. You got to write that. You know, you can't faff about on Facebook or Twitter or sit staring out the window. You got to get on with it. And I quite enjoy it because you write without any pretension, without, it's kind of fearless. You just think, right, I just got to get this down. I just got to do this. You know, I just got to get on with it.
It's almost like you cut out the judgment of everything that you're doing. You don't have time to judge it, but also it's like the adrenaline of having to save a child. I mean, not, it's a bit extreme of an example, but like having to save a child from a car that's coming along. But it's that moment where you just dig into something that you sometimes otherwise can't access. You go into a pool of creativity where you just say, I've got to dig deep right now. I've got to pull out my very best work, and I've got to do it right this second. And yet so foreign, isn't it, to what we all would do? And like you say, and you sit down and you're just like, dum-de-dum-de-dum. And it's that, you know, what they say, your writing will expand to fill the time available, I think it's a kind of an alternative version of the original quote. And I think that it is very much this idea of, what fascinates me is, what if we could get into that zone? Like, what if we could get into that zone at our own writing desk and have that sense of insane writing that we dive deep?
We've got an interview coming soon with Dean Wesley Smith, and this is how he writes everything. He calls it writing into the dark. He just opens up the computer and writes. Doesn't know where he's going. Doesn't stop. Just keeps going. And he gets books done in a draft. So subscribe for that one, folks. You don't want to miss that one out. That is a fantastic episode coming in a few weeks. So yeah, Dean Wesley Smith.
It's incredible. The other thing he mentioned as well, and you know, when you get that situation where you're writing to a deadline, which, as we know, if you're an indie author, you have to create false deadlines. for yourself ultimately, or try and find an accountability partner, or join the Bestseller Academy, where we're asking people to write their book in 12 months. And it's really working. Like, people have incredibly stepped up their game. People have said, if I hadn't joined the Academy, I would not be anywhere near as progressed in my book. And that's so incredible to hear. So there is value to that. There's a value to being part of a group where you're all working towards that goal. But the thing that I love that Linwood said is he talks about this idea of writer's block again and again, something that we've had come up. We've had some guests that have said it's just a figment of our imagination. It's, Osler and
Huckabee and Osler.
Osler said writer's block. It doesn't exist. It's just something we make up to procrastinate. And I don't know if Linwood said this on purpose, but he said, what about in other professions? And he said, plumber's block. And I'm like, how bloody brilliant is that? Plumber's block. I'm sorry, I can't sort out your drains today. Got plumber's block. But I think that, and I have absolutely, since those very early interviews, I have taken on my own story that writer's block doesn't exist. I choose not to believe it. I choose to just believe that I'm not feeling it today, but it doesn't mean that I can't write.
Yeah. I mean, look, the thing is, we're living in a world where there's lockdown, people are having serious mental health issues. There may be perfectly valid reasons why they don't want to sit down and write. They might have other bigger problems to worry about, and I totally get that. But if you're in the zone for writing, if you're keen to write, if you've got a passion for writing, writer's block is just another word for problem solving. You just have a problem. I mean, like I said, I've been working on short stories and they're really hard. There's no wriggle room in short stories for fluff, or faffing about. Every word has to count. It's really, I know I had a thing last week. I wrote the same sentence 12 times over. I swear to God, again and again. And I'm sitting there going, I keep rewriting this, but it isn't. If anything, it's getting worse. So it happens to everyone. But you find solutions. You step away from it. You go for a walk. In my case, I took it off the screen, put it on the notebook, and did a bit of free writing, and just came up with something, and that helped. I think experience helps because you've got through this before. You've broken the sound barrier once, you can do it again. You've gone on before about the 4-minute mile. You've done the 4-minute mile once, you can do it again. And so can we all, so, well, not the 4-minute mile, not me anyway. God, I collapse in a heap. But, you've solved this problem before, you can solve these problems again. So a little bit of experience really helps. And if you're starting out for the first time, these can seem insurmountable. These can seem problematic. But yeah, just get words on the page. And then I was talking to one of the one-on-ones today at the Academy. I've got someone who's finished their first draft, and they're overjoyed that they finished their first draft because now they've got something to work with. They can mold it into shape.
And I think of, when I hear the words writer's block, I envisage literally nothing coming out. Because that's what a block is. It's not that your writing's a bit rubbish or you're just not feeling it today. It's like you're just sitting there with a blank page staring at it. And I think when you hit that place, if you think, I just don't know what to write, then you write about what you're feeling. Like, you don't have to write about, have to carry on the story. Just write about what you could envisage to be your writer's block, and that gets you writing, and that might actually unclog, because it's about flow, isn't it? I mean, joking about plumber's block, ultimately, if there is a block in your pipe, it's about getting a little bit of flow initially, and that makes it easier, and eventually it all unplugs. So if you just start writing a little bit, then in theory it should work itself out, so to speak. But
yeah, I mean, one of the reasons notebooks works for me is no one else sees those notebooks. No one else will ever see them. It's just for my eyes only, and I can write absolute gibberish, but it gets the brain ticking over, and eventually you write something out. Okay, yeah, I can use that. Cool. Okay, let's go on.
Isn't it refreshing as well to hear Linwood talk about imposter syndrome? I mean, he talked about, and jokingly about, well, why are you interviewing me today? And there surely is someone better out there. I love the fact that we get to talk with people who are at the pinnacle of their game, that everyone looks to and thinks, God, one day I wish I could be selling, I wish I could get Stephen King as a fan. I wish I could be selling millions of books. And yet we hear it again and again and again. Everyone, doesn't matter how successful you are, everyone always has this little bit of imposter syndrome, or a big bit of imposter syndrome, making them think, why does anyone want to read this? So I think we all just have to kind of accept that it's part of the writing process and get on with it. Because I've heard this so many times now. It's lovely and refreshing every single time we hear it, because it gives everyone else the permission just to kind of deal with it and move on and know they're never probably going to get rid of it. I think the moment you do, your writing probably does go downhill to some extent.
Yeah, I think so. I think doubt is just part of the process, second guessing yourself. And you can, cope with it in various ways. You can just plow through it and write on, or you can step back and go, okay, is there a problem with this? How do I solve this? But I think it is healthy. I think you should embrace it and work with it, and don't let it cripple you and get you into a sort of downward spiral.
Absolutely. Another way of looking at it is it's the thing that keeps the axe sharp. Because ultimately, if you get to a point in your writing where you become overconfident in your writing, that's where the writing will reflect that. It'll start to just, it'll just be like loose and won't have that edge to it. So it's fascinating. Was there anything else that came up for you in that interview, Mark, when you chatted with Linwood?
One thing I think I want every writer, particularly writers who are just starting out, writers can get very precious about ideas. You probably see it more in screenwriting than you do in novel writing, but you get people go, I've got an idea, but I don't want to talk about it because someone will steal my idea. And it's like, no one's going to, it's not. And, at the end, Linwood was openly discussing this big high concept idea for his next book about self-driving cars,
Which I have to admit, if you go back and remember my first idea that I sent you before Back to Reality, I thought, blimey, it's going to happen.
But what he knows, Linwood knows ideas are not enough. Everyone has ideas, and I can guarantee the idea that you think that is this precious little jewel that no one else has had, there's 7 billion people on the planet, right? There's probably 1 million of them have had the same idea, okay? He knows it's not all about ideas. It's all in the execution. So if you're listening to this and thinking, damn, I had a story about self-driving killer cars, it doesn't matter. It's all about the execution. Yours will be different. If it's a personal expression of who you are and the ideas that you've got about self-driving killer cars, then, tell your story, make your voice heard. I think there's enough room in the world for, plenty of books about self-driving killer cars.
Well, and there is another one, a screenplay that I've been writing for 1.5 years. So it's not about self-driving killer cars, but it's taking that concept of, yeah. It's linked into the screenplay that I've been writing, but it's
wicked,
quite a bit different. But and actually, weirdly enough, born from that very first idea I sent you, which was, do you remember that? It was about a guy in a basement of in Silicon Valley that basically hacks into self-driving cars and assassinates people. Yeah, it's
excellent.
I'm sure, I'm sure there's another 10,000 people that are going, "Oh no, that's my idea." Don't worry, we can all write our own version of it. But it's fascinating to see that. And actually, what was really great is for everyone who was at Mark's the group coaching in the academy. So each month we do 2 group coaching sessions. Mark does a craft coaching session, and I do a life coaching for writers session. It's wonderful. We have this massive Zoom call with like loads of people. It's just fantastic. And that very point that you mentioned about people being concerned about their ideas and holding on to them, that one came up, and there's a whole 10-minute segment, I think, that we've archived on the Academy of you talking specifically about that. And what I tend to see is it's a very common thing, not just in writing actually, but in music. People are saying, "Oh, well, I don't want to send you my track because if it gets out to the internet and someone copies it," and it's a thing that we all go through. I think when we start off, and then we become a little bit less precious and a bit more relaxed, and realize that actually, there's tons of other people who, if I always say to people, if you want someone, if someone steals your idea, well, let them, because it'll only be of value if they go on and make millions out of it. At that point, you bring out your book and say, "Excuse me." It's what all these people have been doing with Ed Sheeran and the artists. They're kind of some 1970s unknown rock group are coming out saying, "Oh, he based his million-selling song on our 1970s hit." And I think, unfortunately, a couple of times they've won, and then it seems like it's a free for all right now, where every
music's slightly different in that the way the law works around that, you get musicologists on board, and they will say, actually, you've got the combination of melody and chord sequence is unfortunately the law also, well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what side of the argument you're on, it doesn't matter if you say, well, I never heard that song before. I mean, both George Harrison and Radiohead, George Harrison, My Sweet Lord, someone else had that tune and melody before him. Radiohead's, I think it's Creep, has the same melody and chord sequence as the Hollies, The Air That I Breathe.
Yeah. If
you listen to those two back to back. Now, there was no accusation of actual plagiarism. It's just one of those things. But because of that, the Hollies get a credit on the Radiohead song.
Yeah. And when you've got a 3-minute song, there's a lot more opportunity for that to happen. When you've got a 200-300 page book, it becomes much more watered down. And
it's more about personal expression. And, you can have, I mean, just this week there was a fun Gerard Butler movie, Greenland, about a comet hitting the Earth. Now, how many films have you seen about comets or asteroids hitting the Earth? And
I actually saw the preview for that on Amazon Prime, I think it was, and I thought, and I was watching, going, "Oh, why are they advertising that film that came out like 10 years ago?"
Is this Deep Impact?
Deep Impact, yeah, that's it.
Or is it Meteor with Sean Connery? Which one is it? And it's, but it's good. It's tonally, it's different. It's a different story, different characters, because in the end, it all comes down to character and the way that you write and the way you express those ideas.
I was also very excited, talking to Netflix, Mark, and streaming. I was very excited to see Sarah Pinborough's new series on Netflix come up. Someone actually mentioned it. So, have you seen Behind Her Eyes? And I'm like, Behind Her Eyes? That sounds familiar. And I was like, hang on a minute. We interviewed, and I remember, if I remember rightly, back at that interview with Sarah Pinborough, wasn't she talking about the deal?
Yep.
And how many years ago was that? That was like,
she talks about the deal. We had the first copy of the book, didn't we?
We had the first copy of the book, and after she appeared on the Bestseller Experiment, her book went to #1 that following week. Do you remember that? And we took full credit for that. And I think we should also take full credit for how amazing the Netflix series is, because she wouldn't have a career without us, would she? Really? I mean, let's be honest.
We should get her on and ask her that question. I'm going to drop her a line and see if
she'll come back on and thank us for what we've done for her career.
It's funny. Weirdly, someone dropped me a line and said, "Didn't you interview Sarah Pinborough?" I said, "Yeah, here's the link." But I am over the moon for her. This is,
me too.
This is every writer's dream come true. It's #1 everywhere.
And it's good. It's really good. That must, I mean, what a relief, right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the same, without giving anything away, but it has an extraordinary twist at the end, which when the book came out was very divisive. And of course, when it happens in a TV show or, something like this on Netflix, that division, you see people going, "What the hell was that ending about? I couldn't get behind it." And you got other people going, "Best ending ever."
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. More, please, So
let's get her back on the show and have a chat about. I'd love to find out. Like, it'd be interesting to hear the kind of post story after all the things. What happened once they went into production and what the reaction's been like as well. It'd be brilliant, excellent stuff. Well, listen, I think we should jump into a bit of social media before we finish up, Mark.
Yeah. We've had some people we've got our own success stories, and who knows, future Netflix TV series. So these are our patrons and supporters who are getting books out there. If you follow us on social media, you'll find that every now and then we put up a new book that goes into the Bestseller Experiment Alumni Library, which is now bulging onto 2 shelves on my bookshelves now. So first one of these, G.B. Ralph has a new book out, Over and Out, which is a gay romantic comedy novella, and Gavin, for it is his name, Gavin Ralph, he says this book is yet another product of the 200 words a day challenge, the brainchild of the Bestseller Experiment podcast. Can't wait to see what 2021 will bring. Gavin, we are over the moon that that the 200 words a day had something to do with Over and Out, getting out there. And this is book 3 in the series of Arthur and Gabriel's adventures. So Gavin, best of luck with that, and just fantastic news.
Brilliant stuff.
And then we had L.A. Davenport drop us a line via email. And he said he's just launched his second novel, The Nucleus of Reality, or The Recollections of Thomas P. And he says, with this one, I feel less like a fraud and more like a writer. It's the first time I feel I've at least fulfilled the aims I had for the book. So, he's going to send us a copy for the library. But yeah, L.A. Davenport, huge congratulations on that. What a title. The Nucleus of Reality, or The Recollections of Thomas P. Huge congrats on that, man.
Amazing stuff. And also loving to hear about writers recognizing the growth in their own journey, because that's what it's all about, right? I mean, that's what it's all about. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. Some good news from the Academy and the Bestseller Experiment group. So Jeff White, it's Jeff White who's the author who's been putting up new covers for his books, and they've been really well received. He's seen an uptick in sales on that. Gareth Lewis, he's got a short story in an anthology. Lost Gods is out on March the 1st. Paul Arduin, who's one of the big success stories of the Academy, he writes his amazing mystery novels. His 7th mystery novel is going to be released on March 9th. He's already got 725 full price pre-orders. Wow. So which is just fantastic. So Paul just goes from strength to strength with those. And then two of our members, Ian Sainsbury and Arlie Jacobs, have been accepted into a thriller anthology, Make Them Pay, which releases March the 15th. So, our Academates, our Academy members, they are getting their words out there. They're getting read. They're getting sales and pre-orders and all that good stuff. So congratulations to all of you.
Yeah, brilliant. And keep it coming. Keep up the great work. And, it all starts, folks, with simply 200 words a day. So if you want to join us in the 200-word challenge, if you would like to start, we're going into March now. So make March, if March is your month where you're going to start, see if you can, firstly, here's the goal. Can you write 3 days in a row? Sounds easy. It's harder than you think. Can you write 3 days in a row at the same time each day? Bigger challenge. Very hard. Give that a go. And if you can you keep it going for the rest of the month, no matter when you start? So we want to hear your stories. Can you write this March? Can you get your record streak, whatever that will be for you in March? So join us. Get over to 200wordchallenge.com and sign up today.
Wonderful stuff. Come and find us on social media as well, folks. We are on Twitter and Instagram and at BestsellerXP, and on Facebook we're Bestseller Experiment, and also bestsellerexperiment.com, and tap the contact tab and we see all your emails and we reply to them too. So drop us a line. Brilliant. Have a wonderful writing couple of weeks, folks, and we look forward to seeing you on our next episode of the Bestseller Experiment podcast. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1 and a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye. Are you ready to transform your writing and your life? Join the 200-word challenge today. In just 5 days, learn to develop a lifelong writing habit with over 2 hours of free expert coaching and the encouragement of a vibrant community. This program has already changed the lives of thousands of writers like you. No matter how busy you are, this challenge will show you that with just 200 words a day, you can significantly boost your creativity, productivity, mental health, and confidence, propelling you towards the end. For the first time, receive comprehensive coaching and step-by-step guidance, all for free. Transform your writing habit and start your journey to become the writer you've always aspired to be. What are you waiting for? Sign up for free now at 200wordchallenge.com and make writing a part of your daily life for life. To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality. And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.